Welcome back, everyone. We're diving into a world where AI is, well, becoming a bit of an artist.
Yeah, it's pretty mind-blowing.
We're talking 3D modeling, the tech behind all the awesome visuals in video games and movies, and how this new AI model called MESHTRON is changing the game. We've been digging into some academic papers and a literature review about how AI is being used for things like architectural design. It's pretty fascinating stuff.
Yeah, it really is.
Get ready to explore how AI is catching up to humans when it comes to creating those crazy detailed 3D models and what that can mean for, well, just about everything.
I think what's really captivating is how AI has gone from just mimicking artists to actually becoming a creative force in its own right.
Right.
And MESHTRON is a perfect example of that. I mean, we're talking about AI that can potentially generate 3D models that are as good as, if not better, than what humans can create.
Okay, so before we get too far down the rabbit hole, let's break it down for those who might not be super familiar with 3D modeling. Meshes, they're basically the building blocks of everything you see in those virtual worlds.
Cool.
Kind of like the skeletons of 3D objects, right?
Exactly, yeah. Think of them like the framework that everything else is built upon. And up until now, creating those meshes has been a really labor-intensive process. Traditional methods, they work, but they often result in models that look kind of blocky, and they lack the detail that you would get from a really skilled 3D artist.
So what you're saying is that it's like trying to build a super detailed, delicate flower, but all you have are Legos.
That's a great analogy. You can kind of get the basic shape, but you're not going to capture all those little details and the nuances that a real artist would.
Right, so that's where AI comes in. But even with the advances in AI, haven't those previous models struggled to match the complexity of human-created meshes?
Yeah, for sure. Older AI mesh generators were kind of limited by how many faces they could handle.
Okay, back up for a sec. What's a face when we're talking about 3D models?
Oh, good point. A face is basically like a polygon, one of those flat shapes that make up the surface of a 3D model.
Okay, got it.
So, artist-made meshes can have tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of these faces to capture all the little details. But those older AI models, they were stuck with just a fraction of that.
So it's kind of like the difference between drawing a stick figure and a photorealistic portrait.
Haha, yeah, pretty much. But here's where things get really interesting. MESHTRON, this new model, it can generate meshes with up to 64,000 faces. That's 40 times more than the previous best.
Whoa, okay, that is a huge jump. But how does it even do that? It sounds incredibly complex.
It is, but to put it simply, it uses this incredibly efficient method for processing information. It's a special type of transformer, and that allows it to handle massive amounts of data without getting completely bogged down.
So that's how it's able to create those super detailed meshes we're
Yeah,
talking about.
exactly.
But isn't it starting with something that seems incredibly simple? A point cloud, which is basically just a bunch of dots scattered in 3D space.
That's right. It's kind of like looking up at the stars and being able to see those constellations like, the Big Dipper or Orion.
Right.
MESHTRON can take all those scattered points and connect them in a way that creates a whole detailed 3D model.
That is wild.
Mhm.
But I can only imagine that creating those kinds of meshes with tens of thousands of faces, it must take a ton of computing power.
Yeah, it does. And that was one of the big challenges the researchers had to tackle.
So how'd they solve it?
They came up with a clever technique called truncated mesh sequences, which basically allows them to break down the problem into smaller chunks, so they're not trying to process everything at once.
Okay, makes sense. Like learning to sculpt with small pieces of clay before tackling a whole statue.
Yeah, exactly.
But then how do you make sure that when you put all those little chunks back together, the final mesh is consistent and doesn't end up looking all wonky?
That's where global conditioning comes in. Think of it like having a blueprint, making sure that each section fits together perfectly into the overall design. And what's really fascinating? They found this really unexpected way to make MESHTRON even better at creating realistic details.
Oh, how's that?
They discovered that by adding just a little bit of randomness, some noise, to the input data, it actually makes the models even more realistic and detailed.
So a little bit of chaos actually helps. That's trippy.
It is, right?
But I have another question. With all those thousands of faces, how do you make sure the AI puts them together in a way that, actually makes sense. Like, you don't want walls floating in midair.
You're totally right, and they had to come up with some really specific rules to make sure the AI doesn't create nonsensical structures. Like, imagine a house where the walls don't actually connect to anything.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that wouldn't be good.
These rules ensure that the mesh is structurally sound and that all the pieces fit together like they should.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense. So we've talked about how MESHTRON works and all of its intricacies, but what about the bigger picture here? How does this all tie into the use of AI in fields like architecture? I mean, it's not like architects are out there designing video game characters.
Right, but 3D modeling is super crucial for architects too. They use it to visualize their designs, to analyze how their buildings interact with the environment, and even to explore all sorts of possibilities before they start actually building.
Sure, that makes sense. So then AI could help make those processes easier and faster, allowing architects to really refine their designs.
Yeah, exactly. And the literature review we've been looking at, it highlights some really cool ways that AI is already being used in architecture. Like, imagine being able to just give AI a sketch or even just a description of what you want a building to look and function like. And then boom, the AI can generate a bunch of different options based on that.
Wow, that's amazing. It's almost like having a digital brainstorming partner. But wouldn't that lead to a bunch of buildings that all look the same, like cookie cutter designs?
I see your point, but I don't think that's necessarily the case. AI is a tool, right? The architect's skill is in curating all those designs that the AI comes up with, picking the ones that fit their vision, and then refining them to create something unique and special.
So it's not replacing the architect, it's more like giving them a superpower to amplify their creativity and efficiency.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. And on top of that, AI can help architects optimize their designs for things like energy efficiency, making sure they're structurally sound, or even figuring out how to get the most natural light into the building.
So it's helping to build smarter, more sustainable, and more human-centered buildings. I like it. But are there any real examples of buildings that have been designed using AI, or is this all still very theoretical?
There are. The research actually mentions this really cool project where they used generative AI to design a bunch of unique pavilions. They were inspired by natural forms, which is super interesting. The AI was able to generate all these designs that were not only beautiful, but also structurally sound, and they actually built them.
Okay, that's really cool. So AI is already starting to shape the world around us in some really tangible ways.
It is. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's take a closer look at some specific examples of how MESHTRON itself is being used and really dive into those results. What do you say?
I'm totally down for that. Let's do it.
All right, so we've established that MESHTRON is pretty incredible in how it creates these super detailed 3D models, but, seeing is believing. Right?
Right. What kind of results are we actually talking about here? You mentioned earlier that the research paper had some comparisons.
They did, yeah. They put MESHTRON head-to-head with a few other methods, some traditional ones and some older AI models. And the results were, well, pretty dramatic.
Oh, boy.
MESHTRON consistently produced meshes with a much higher level of detail and a realism that the other methods just couldn't match.
So it's not just about the number of faces, it's also about how those faces are arranged and connected to create a realistic-looking model.
You got it. It's about that overall visual appeal and how natural the mesh looks. And what's even cooler is that MESHTRON isn't picky about where it gets its point cloud data from. You can feed it data from artist-created models, 3D scans of real objects, even those text-to-3D services that are popping up everywhere.
So it's like whatever instructions you give it, whether it's a rough sketch, a scan of a teacup, or even just a description, it can turn that into a full-blown 3D model.
Pretty much. And it does it with amazing accuracy and detail, sometimes even better than what a human artist could create.
Wow. Okay. That's seriously impressive. But with all that processing going on, it's got to take a lot of time, right? I mean, generating those massive meshes, it can't be instant.
Well, yeah, speed is always a factor with these kinds of AI models, but the developers of MESHTRON, they were pretty smart about it. They've optimized what they call the inference process. It's basically how quickly the model can actually create something once it's been trained.
So they found ways to make it run faster.
Yeah, exactly. They've implemented this thing called a rolling KV cache. It's a little technical, but basically it lets the model process long sequences of data much more efficiently. So even with all those details, it can churn out those meshes pretty quickly.
So MESHTRON, it's not just powerful and accurate, it's fast too. That's quite a combo. But I can't help but wonder, with all this talk about AI creating these amazing 3D models, are we headed towards a future where human artists are out of a job? Is AI coming for their jobs?
It's a big question that a lot of people are asking, and it's definitely worth considering. It's unlikely that AI is going to fully replace human artists,
Hmm.
but it will change how they work and what they can create, for sure.
So you see it as more of a collaboration than a replacement. AI as a tool to help artists do even more incredible things.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. Think of it like this. AI can take care of some of the more technical stuff,
Right.
like creating the initial mesh or optimizing it based on certain criteria. That frees up human artists to focus on the creative stuff, the things that really require that human touch.
So AI is doing the heavy lifting. So human artists can concentrate on the artistry, the emotions, the storytelling of 3D modeling.
Exactly. And that collaboration, I think it has the potential to lead to some truly groundbreaking creations.
I'm excited to see what the future holds. But before we jump ahead too far, let's bring it back down to earth a bit and explore how MESHTRON and these kinds of technologies are already being used in specific fields, like the architecture world we talked about earlier.
Sounds good to me. Let's shift gears and take a closer look at how AI is shaping the world of architecture right now. So, we've seen that AI can create some truly remarkable 3D models, but what happens when you give those AI tools to, a real artist?
Yeah. Does it enhance their abilities or does it somehow take away from that human element of creativity?
That's the question, isn't it? It's a fascinating one to consider, and honestly, I don't think AI is going to be replacing human artists anytime soon.
You don't think so?
I don't, but it will change how they work and the kinds of things they create.
Right. So it's less about replacing them and more about how things evolve. Like AI is becoming a new tool in their toolbox.
Exactly. It's like when photography was invented.
Oh, interesting.
It didn't make painting obsolete, right? It just gave artists this whole new way to capture and express their vision.
Okay, I see what you mean.
AI is doing something similar for 3D artists. It's giving them these new ways to explore ideas, experiment with different forms, and, really push the boundaries of their craft.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
But I think there's always that little bit of fear,
Hmm.
that AI will make art less human somehow, less emotional. Like if a machine can create something beautiful, does it devalue the human effort and creativity that goes into traditional art?
I get that. I totally understand that concern, but I don't think it's really valid. Art isn't just about the technical skill, right? It's about the ideas, the emotions, the story the artist is trying to tell, and those things are inherently human.
So even if an AI can create a technically perfect 3D model, it's still the human artist who gives it meaning, like breathes life into it.
Exactly. The AI might be able to provide the building blocks, but it's the human artist who shapes those blocks into something meaningful, something that other humans can connect with on an emotional level.
I like that. It's reassuring in a way.
Yeah.
It means that even in this world where AI is capable of all these amazing things, human creativity is still essential.
Oh, I definitely think so. And to take it a step further, I think this collaboration between humans and AI actually has the potential to create things that neither could achieve on their own.
Ooh, that is exciting. What would that look like in the real world? Can you give me an example?
Sure. Imagine an architect, right? And they're using AI to come up with different building designs.
Okay.
They give the AI some parameters to work with, like the location, the climate, the purpose of the building.
Got it.
And the AI can just explore tons of different possibilities, considering things a human might not even think about. Then the architect can step in, choose the designs that look promising, and refine them.
Adding their own style and taking into account the people who will actually be using the building.
Exactly. It's a true partnership where each brings their own strengths to the table. And we're already seeing this happening in other creative fields, too. Musicians are using AI to generate melodies. Filmmakers use it for special effects. Even writers use AI sometimes to help them get past writer's block.
Wow. It's mind-blowing when you think about all the possibilities. But as with any powerful technology, there are bound to be some risks or challenges that come with it.
Oh, absolutely. One thing that comes to mind is bias. If the data used to train these AI models is biased, then the outputs from those models are going to be biased too.
Can you give me an example? How would that play out in real life?
Sure. Let's say an AI model used for architectural design was trained on a data set of buildings designed mostly by men.
Oh,
It's possible that the model might unconsciously favor designs that are more, well, masculine, and that could lead to a lack of diversity in the types of buildings being created.
oh, wow. Yeah, I see what you mean. So it's super important to be mindful of the data that's being used to train these AI models.
Absolutely. We need to make sure it's diverse, that it represents all different perspectives, and that it doesn't reinforce existing inequalities.
Makes sense.
And then there's the question of control, right?
Right.
As AI gets more and more sophisticated, it's important to make sure humans are still in control, making sure that these AI systems are being used ethically and responsibly, and that they're aligned with human values.
So it's not just about creating the technology. It's about making sure it's used for good.
Exactly. It's about shaping the future we want to see.
Well said. This has been an incredible journey. We've explored so much, from the nuts and bolts of how MESHTRON works to, these big questions about art and creativity in the age of AI.
I've really enjoyed this discussion.
Me too. And to wrap things up, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought. The future of AI isn't something to be afraid of. It's something we can embrace with both curiosity and a sense of responsibility. It's up to all of us to shape that future.
Couldn't agree more. Let's continue to explore, to learn, and to create, always pushing the boundaries of what's possible with AI.
That's a perfect note to end on. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of AI and 3D modeling.
It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you next time.